I'm here with Andrew T. Austin, the creator of Metaphors of Movement and IEMT. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Metaphors of Movement. So, Andy, where did this whole thing start?
It started, well, I don't know. There's a number of issues here I've got to go into because it didn't just start on it wasn't a single inception.
Okay.
And also memory-wise, everything either happened 3 years ago or when I was 8 years old. The 80s was only like 10 years ago, as far, in my world. So I can't really give you a chronology very easily. However, there was a number of influences and there was the catalyst. And the catalyst is none other than Charles Falkner, one of the smartest, cleverest people, nicest guys you can ever meet. I spent some time with Charles. He was in the UK doing some teaching. And I had an NLP practice group I used to run at Chichester University. And he basically came down. We hung out for the day. He did a presentation. I later went to see him do the same presentation another time, maybe two more times actually. And I was left completely bamboozled, absolutely completely bamboozled by what Charles was saying. And I didn't understand a word of it. Now, what I was aware of is that that's not a limitation on Charles' communication. That was a limitation on what I was hearing and my capacity to hear. It was like he'd been shouting at the deaf. That's the term I've always used. It's like I was completely deaf to what it was being communicated. What that triggered in me now was a journey, an inward journey of reflection, basically trying to work out what the hell he said. Now, the reason that was a catalyst is because that came at a time that I was already doing IEMT, which I know you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
And I was developing some of the IMT stuff into identity work, which was already going into metaphorical areas. But I didn't know what to do with that stuff. I'd also got some background experience in clean language. I've never formally trained in clean language, but I've read the books. I know some of the trainers. I used to go to one of the clean language practice groups that was local to me, run by the wonderful Marion Way, who had around her some really clever people. And so I used to go and basically hang out with them only for a short period of time, the practice group, and I learned a lot. They taught me a lot of stuff. I went to see James and Penny Tompkins, the developers of Clean Language, at some of their stuff, and also I'd had some exposure to David Grove, in a training room with him. So I got some rudimentary understanding of autogenic metaphor, but I'd never been able to make clean language, the application of that, work in my field, in the clientele that I'm working with. And it appears to be quite a simple little model. The sophistication in which they apply it is amazing, and the results they're able to get from a seemingly simple model I found very impressive. So I had that in the background, but I'm working with people who are quite challenging clients with complex needs, complex mental health stuff going on.
Yeah.
It wasn't really the platform that was going to help me help them. And then and decoding Charles's stuff, what starts to emerge is I'm hearing now people saying things and I'm hearing them differently to what I was hearing before.
Do you have an
And
example?
it's something that actually, sorry?
Do you have an example of what that might look like or sound like?
Yeah, when people say I'm stuck,
Yeah.
I would interpret what they meant. People say I'm on an uphill struggle. I would interpret what they meant by that,
Okay. Well, that
rather
makes
than
sense.
actually heard what they say. So if a person says, I'm not going anywhere, my life is over, I just feel like I'm dead, my life's over, I might as well not be here. That sounds like suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
But now I'm hearing that as idiomatic communication that has a dynamic structure to it, which denotes some very specific things within the structure. And now, because that's the stuff that basically Charles went ding in my head. Now what I'm doing, of course, is now working out what are those structures. And so I'm now hearing things no longer diagnostically and through my interpretation of what is intended or meant by the communication. It's what James Lawley said. You now actually believe what they say. And when he said that, I thought, that's it. When they say my life is over, I believe that is the representation of their experience.
Yeah.
Rather than going, well, I'm sure it's not. Is there ever a time you feel like your life's not over? Looking for a counterexample, thus invalidating what they've just said.
Yeah.
So now what I'm doing is starting to decode the bits and pieces. And that's really how it began. And it began in a very clumsy, very amateurish, very amateurish manner. Looking back now, it's quite cringeworthy.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, when I first started the work with you, like learning these things and these distinctions, like when you just start to hear that. I was talking to someone that I trained, and she was talking about a client that she was working with, and she's like, he's a very high status individual, and like he's up there, and like, and then I'm instantly thinking, okay, this guy is probably going to be elevated. So I had a
Mm.
conversation with her, and I'm like, well, this is probably what you'll see. These are the things you could do, but let me know what happens, because it could be completely different. So it's crazy the amount of
Yeah.
stuff that's layered that we just are so unaware of.
And I think that's the thing that really I was quite surprised by. And as time has gone on, I'm less surprised by it, which is in idiomatic communication, which then reveals metaphorical communication, which then gives the structure of people's representation of experience. What we have is a depth of information, the data density of a autogenic metaphor is extraordinary. And the stuff we're able to derive from this it's just extraordinary. I honestly believe we're about 1% into the possibilities. I don't think I've finished. I know, because I'm always finding new stuff, and I certainly think that those people who understand the work well enough will be able to continue this and go into areas, because I've got my own my own reality, my own blind spots, my own biases. There's lots of stuff I'm not seeing simply because I'm not able to perceive it. There'll be other people who are able to perceive those things that I'm not perceiving, and will be able to go into other areas that are yet undocumented and unrecorded. So I think the potential that's there is extraordinary, and I say we're just at the beginning of the discovery.
What I have found I think it might have been a book by Charles Falkner, I can't remember, but there was a specific phrase that any specific therapeutic model we have, maybe you said it, I can't remember who said it, but it was about every therapeutic model that is used by nature has a filter, because we need to filter information. An autogenic metaphor, being from the unconscious hemisphere, is so broad, so obtuse, that like there are meta programs in autogenic metaphor, there are time perspectives, which I know is the level 6 work, great work if you haven't already done that, and there's so much to it. So if somebody's got another model of thinking, got another therapeutic construct, and they know it well, there's a higher likeliness there'll be some sort of crossover, because it's essentially a different level of filtering which can be applied to the metaphorical constructs. And I think that offers, as you say, so much possibility. There's so many different ways to chunk things.
Yeah, Charles also had the phrase "worlds within a word," which is actually the name of one of his products. Worlds within a word, where literally you've just got like one word or one small idiomatic phrase, and the way that's structured within their communication, you can just dive in and derive so much data. After a while, it starts to look like mind reading. And because if you're on the receiving end of the process, people go, "How do you know that? How do you do that?" Well, because you've just told me. You just didn't know that you were telling me, because a lot of this communication, idiomatic and metaphorical communication, is largely back channel unconscious communication that's inserted into conscious communication,
Yeah.
which is in the early days when I was trying to explore the idioms with people and what that meant and why they were structured that way. I would draw attention to the idiom. And in doing so, immediately the person I'm speaking to would dismiss it and go, "Well, that's just a figure of speech." And that confused me, because they would be people say things quite clearly, and there may be two or three idioms that are stacking, very clearly following the same logical reasoning in terms of the structure. And yet, when challenged on it, the person immediately discounts it, dismisses it, or even say, "I didn't say that."
Yeah.
And that demonstrates to me it's largely a back channel unconscious mode that's slipping into the communication. So I thought, ooh, does that mean exploring idioms to get into metaphor is giving us direct access to the non-dominant hemisphere, the hemispheric divide into asynchronous, asymmetric function of the brain? Are we getting now a way into the unconscious stuff that the person's not consciously aware of? So that's then when I went, oh, okay, now I need to go back to the textbooks. Got to go back to looking up, okay, so we know we can access the non-dominant hemisphere by using hypnosis effectively, for example. Bandler and Grinder wrote fantastic books on that, bypassing the dominant hemisphere. Milton Erickson, Gregory Bateson. There's a lot of stuff around this, which is how do we access that? But they all require role play. They all require the client to play a role with the therapist also playing the role of a hypnotist. So the therapist now goes, I'm a hypnotherapist. So an actor playing a role effectively. And it requires a play along with the client. That's problematic because any model that requires the client to be something other than they are is problematic because people are what they are, which is why so many therapists come across as cocky and almost bully-like. Because in order for my model to work with you, you have to play your part. And so I'm going to do clever stuff to you to make sure you play along with me. Now, the clientele that I tend to get aren't going to behave like that. They're not going to do that. They will walk, they will tell me rudely to be somewhere else. There's all sorts of reaction sets. Or people just don't play along, they just don't get it. Now, in that case, I had to come up with something else. And this gave me an opportunity. Now, how do I utilize that to work with those individuals? Because they're not going to respond to hypnosis. They're not going to play along. They're not in that place. They're not a trainee of a training program. That was then how this all began.
So would it be fair to say that IEMT, Metaphors of Movement, and was basically because you'd done a lot of stuff, I know, with NLP in the past. Essentially, you were getting really challenging clients and you needed to do something different to work with these people.
Yeah, those things have a place as well in those contexts. I mean, some simple NLP techniques can be life-changing for some individuals. But it's not so much necessarily the problem the person has that drives them to behave in that way. They're not workshop trainees who bought into the process. They're a person who's coming along for ostensibly treatment. Don't make me change. Don't make me be a different person. Just treat my disorder. So that's a patient of treatment. That's not a client buying into change work where I will change my behavior. And that's why I'm coming to you. So they're your classic coaching clients, the people who will select things like hypnosis. They'll be selecting NLP because essentially they bought into those processes. And with hypnotherapy, of course, I'm a patient being treated by you. It uses the surgical model. I'm rendered unconscious and basically don't have a participation in what happens next. And you put me to sleep, you work your magic, and at the end of it, you wake me up. And I then tell you I feel better, just like anesthetic and surgery does. But I'm not involved in the process. Now, some people buy into that, and that's what they want. And that has varying qualities of success. It does vary. Although, of course, if you ask those therapists, they're always 100% successful. NLP is an interaction where the person is willing to think differently.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to think differently. There's nothing wrong with me, mate. I've just got depression. Don't tell me I've got to change. Just treat the depression. So they've isolated the depression from self. They've isolated depression from them having causation. That's not a person who's going to respond too well to being asked meta-model questions.
Yeah. Just resisting. And then you've got the therapist who's like, well, you just need to do the things I want you to do. You just need to play the role.
The gaslighting then begins. You're a polarity responder. You've got limiting beliefs. You just need to be more open-minded.
But these are the reasons why you can't work with me. No, I can't work with you. Because one of the reasons I got into NLP to start my journey was I came from the frame effective communication is the response it elicits. Like, if I can work with you, with your stuff and communicate in a way that you will receive it, that will help everybody get to what they want to do, what they want to shift. And this is why I love the metaphors work so much. One, because it's allowed me to work on myself personally, which I've always avoided. But also, you can really be tailored in what you do to that individual. It's really great. So you talked about roughly where it's come from, how it sort of developed and how it came out of things. So where are you taking it to? What's the sort of goal? Like, what do you have in mind?
So essentially, what is it all? What am I doing? I don't know. I'm just exploring stuff and then basically trying to... The challenge is the stuff I perceive And I know I accept that I don't perceive things necessarily the way everyone else does, and I don't perceive things necessarily the way other people wish I did. So I'm aware that I'm the oddball, so to speak, which is an advantage, disadvantage depending on context. So I'm largely exploring the stuff. I learn things, I discover things. I put those things together, think, oh, then I test it out. That's all well and good. Now what I've got to try and do is convey that to other people, that other people can test it out. And that's the teaching part. And that's what I'm doing. And so I try and codify it in a way that makes it a teachable skill set that other people can explore and replicate. And that's the teaching part. So that's where all the different levels come from and all the rest. End goal, end practice, I have absolutely no idea. This is just what I enjoy doing. And that's what I do. I'm not looking for a Nobel Prize and stuff like, although, the money would be good, whatever comes with that. But you know what I mean? So it's not a status thing for me. It's not a thing. It's just literally an exploration. And I think in part, for the NLPs out there, it's an away from value. Simply because I experienced psychiatry firsthand, both as a recipient and as a member of staff. I've experienced NLP both as a recipient and as a person delivering it. I've experienced hypnotherapy, again, from both sides. It left me incredibly disappointed in multiple ways. And yet, unfortunately, those scenes don't seem to accept that. It's the failure rate is an inconvenient truth to everybody. Now, I embrace the whole failure rate. I think we've got to be absolutely honest and realistic about that whole thing. That we cannot change, this nonsense. You can just use a few magic words, wave the magic wand, and that person's life is fixed forevermore. And then they buy your presents. I only wish that was true. We've got more and more therapists on the planet every year, and yet, globally, mental health rates continue to decline. Now, I know correlation is not causation, but I think it might be a contributing factor. The therapization of society, the therapization of culture, the medicalization of everything. So in part, it's a reaction to what I see happening. It's a reaction to the high status celebrity therapist, the high status celebrity coach. They're everywhere. And mostly what they're teaching is stuff that makes them money. And I don't doubt that within what they're doing, there's a lot of reasonable, good stuff. But I think if it was that good and reasonable, why do they have to lie so much? And that's my issue, is that can we not just be honest about stuff? And so in part, a lot of this stuff, the reason I convey it and teach it to other people is I think there's an inherent honesty in the work because of what it exposes. I've certainly, myself, it's exposed those things, to myself. And I think I've undergone a process as well in that sense. So I'm trying to restore an honesty to the whole therapy notion that I think is there and is not there. And there's a delusional component both on expectations from the public, because they've been children are raised in therapeutic environments constantly from the moment they're born and communicating. They're exposed to therapeutic process, and pop psychology is absolutely everywhere. It's in the schools, it's in the education of parents, it's in the hospitals. Everything is now reflects therapeutic ideals, and it's not working. But it does raise expectation sets, and people are eternally disappointed by what they get and going broke in the process as other people get rich.
100%. So
I think that's where it's going. What is my motive? That's the motive. Where does this end up? Probably with me being ever more unpopular in the therapy communities. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I also do work with colleagues Nick Kemp, and it's just like it doesn't work every time. It won't work for everybody, and you can do the best you can, but we don't have to lie about it. Like sometimes it just doesn't work, and maybe somebody needs someone different. And
yeah,
I definitely think that.
And Nick is another. I'm sorry. Nick is another great outspoken person because he's willing to call it out and basically say what's really going on. And I mean, his favorite line to me in years back was "lower your expectations," which is funny because it's something I'd said to him prior. Before I got involved in the training side of stuff, he was like, lower your expectations, and it was just so true. Just got to lower them.
Okay, well, if you haven't done Metaphors of Movement and you're keen to learn something, a different, unique, and for me personally, a different and unique way of working, do come check us out. Andy has his training, I have mine, but it's going to be great. And yeah, we welcome you on the journey, even if we don't quite know where it's going. So thank you, Andy. It's been a real pleasure. Have a great one.
Thank you, Dale.
Enjoy.